All right, and we're on. We're on. Rabbi Saroken, welcome back.
Thanks, Rabbi Schwartz. Vayeshev today.
Vayeshev, 30 seconds after Vayeshev. No, so we said at the end of last week's segment that Vayishlach ends with Jacob on kind of this high.
Mhm.
You know, he's worked things out with Esau as best maybe as it could be, and he's going to begin his life, this sort of a new stage of his life. Eretz Yisrael, he's back in the land of Israel. So we start here, Vayeshev, an interesting Rashi comment
Yeah.
at the beginning of the Sedra, which is, so it's Vayeshev Yaakov, and Vayeshev meaning like settled, like he settled down, but not just in a place, but sort of miyushav
Mhm.
in his own soul. Like things are okay. I'm in a stage of life that feels good, and I'm comfortable, and things are okay with my family. And then all of a sudden jumps up at him, says Rashi, the problem of Joseph. The problem of Joseph. So what's the problem of Joseph?
Yeah. So we're going to see right from the onset of Vayeshev that Jacob is settled right in the land of
Migorei Aviv.
Canaan.
Yeah.
And that it's funny, we we read that Jacob is settled in the land of Canaan. And then right away we see, at 17 years of age, Joseph tending the flock. So we see Jacob's, favorite son. So Jacob's got many tribes of sons. And his favorite son is Joseph because Joseph was, the Torah tells us, a child of his old age. But what we also know is that Joseph was one of the two children that Jacob was blessed to bring into the world with his beloved, love of his life, Rachel.
Right.
And so it's an interesting question, sort of the affinity that Jacob has toward Joseph, right? Like, I imagine it's complicated for him to favor Benjamin, the other child, because Rachel dies in childbirth with Benjamin. So I'm imagining that that's pretty complicated. But we do know that Joseph is Jacob's favorite, and we see Joseph at 17 years old. And he, I don't know. I don't know if you feel like this, but I feel like you can sort of imagine their home life, right? They're like, a family with steps, or halves. I'll say halves.
Right.
So some of those children came from Leah, some of them came from Rachel, some came from the two concubines. So you've got like sort of four mothers feeding in. By the way, sorry, total hard stop, but I was just reading an article about Elon Musk, who's like building this crazy expensive like compound. Yeah, that he sort of envisions all of the moms of his children. Okay, anyway, go back to Jacob. So, in this scenario, Joseph seems to be somewhat isolated in his relationship among the brothers. And we see him at 17, and he's sort of tattling. The Torah says he's like bringing bad reports of his brothers to their dad.
Right.
And so then we see that Jacob gives Joseph this beautiful, colorful coat. And this makes the brothers hate Joseph even more. And it's actually one of those lines that every time I come to it, it's like an internal like cringe, where it says that like his brothers like despised him so much that they couldn't even say like one kind word to him.
Right. Shalom.
Yeah. Like it's a crazy thing to imagine what it must feel like to be a 17-year-old kid with all these brothers surrounding you and one sister, and like knowing that they hate you. Like they can't stand him.
Yeah, but he's a nudnik, right? He
Nudnik?
he's
like a tattletale?
Well, so either so there's that piece. Okay, so that's already like at what point is he so sort of tonally deaf in terms of interpersonal relations that he doesn't realize what he's doing is making people angry?
Yeah.
So the dream, like if you knew, if you were even remotely sort of aware of what was going on, and then would you go to your brothers and say, "Oh, by the way, I had a dream, and you guys were all serving me, bowing down at the ground, and I became the leader of the." No, you wouldn't do that.
And then, by the way, after you get the reaction, you double down and you say, "Oh, I had another dream."
Exactly.
And this time, mom and dad were involved also.
Yeah, Joseph. Interestingly, so to me, Jacob doesn't seem to change that much. I don't think he doesn't seem to change. Joseph, I think, changes a lot. Yeah,
I agree.
yeah,
And yeah.
yeah. Just sort of interesting. And really, the two major those are the two major characters in the second half of Genesis.
Oh yeah, you've got really a 4-part miniseries coming up with Joseph.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing though, right? So you're talking about the two dreams. So Joseph has two dreams. He shares it with his brothers, both of them. The first time his brothers get annoyed, and the second time, not only do his brothers get annoyed, but his dad is also like, "What are you trying to say?"
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
all bowing down to you, right? Because in both of these, I guess it's a dream sequence at this point. Joseph sort of imagines his own grandeur. Basically, it's an interesting next move, though, because what happens after the dreams is that the brothers go out into the fields where they're gonna, work, do their work, and Joseph is behind, and then his dad, Jacob, who we know pretty well, at this point says like, "Hey, Joey, come." I just nicknamed him. Go out to the fields, like go check on your brothers, and you sort of feel like, oh my gosh, Jacob, that's a bad idea.
Yeah. What do you think is going on there with Jacob? You think it's intentional? Do you think it's lack of awareness? You think it's I don't know. I mean, it's so like on the one hand,
Yeah.
this is where also you get
Mhm.
into the Torah conversation. This whole sort of tension between what has to happen, because at this point you have to put the pieces on the chessboard so that ultimately the Israelites will be in Egypt, right? And this is like part of that, and then the other side of it is the tension is their free will, like all this kind of stuff. But do you think Jacob is being directed sort of by God? Well, this has the way it has to play out. Is it Jacob trying to? I don't know. That's
It's an interesting question, right? So one might sort of question Jacob's own sort of emotional intelligence in this moment, or his parenting skills, right? Like,
right. Right.
there's issues between the boys. Now you're going to send Joseph out, and basically, it's not only check and see how they're doing, and he says, and like, come report back to me, which is really what what drove the brothers crazy at the beginning was Joseph was
Exactly.
tattling on them all the time. But you do. Like, I don't know. On one hand, I feel like I could rate it a whole bunch of different ways. Like, if I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, I might be like, oh, he's super busy. He just needs someone to be the eyes and ears of, see what's going on in the ground, what the boys are up to.
Right.
Then Joseph, he's home and around.
Right.
The other part of me feels like it's not such a smart move to, like, as a parent, to put him in the role of being like the one who's going to then come back and tell if they're not doing what they should be doing. It's like, it's bad. But what is actually really interesting is that Joseph does go, right? Joseph goes, he goes and he visits, he bumps into a stranger, and the stranger says like, no, they're not here, but they were here. Go that way and you'll find them. And so Joseph follows the stranger, and he goes to Dotan, and he finds his brothers, and they see him from afar, and they like huddle up and decide that they're going to kill him. And they say to each other when they see him like walking, oh, here comes that dreamer. Right now, let us kill him. Let's throw him into the pit. And we can make up the story and say that a savage beast devoured him to death. Now, and I love this, like, we shall see what comes of him in his dreams. So like they're still holding on to like this.
For sure.
This sort of annoying thing that he had done to them. But when Reuben hears it, he tries to save them. And he says, like,
Save
actually,
Joseph.
he says, like, let's not actually kill him. Let's
put him in a pit.
Let's put him in the pit.
Yeah.
And so they do that. And I think this is one of my most disturbing moments in Torah is it's bad enough that they throw their brother in a pit. They conspire too. And then they do throw him in a pit. But then they sit down and they have like a picnic.
Sit down. Yeah.
On the side. Like that for me, I don't know why. That's like, what? It's funny. It's not actually funny at all. But with that terrible scenario where there was like a murder of the CEO of United Healthcare, right?
Yep.
And then like that is so problematic to me. Like it like breaks my heart that stuff can be happening. But then the reaction of people sort of like, who's next? This is what you get when, if, like that was crazy to me. I feel like it was bad when they threw Joseph in a pit. But then, like, what happened next? To like sit down and be like, oh, who brought lunch?
Right.
It's as if like
Pass the mayonnaise.
like they just don't.
Or
It's
the
like
mustard, probably, but yeah. No,
they're unaffected.
Yeah, it's a very it's also just such an interesting thing because the Torah doesn't put things there for no reason.
Yeah.
It's clearly intended, I think, to be disturbing, and I think to be an illustration of the potential that we have for just a sheer callousness of behavior. That we can so easily disregard the suffering of others. To literally sit down. He's in a pit in the desert, and with no food, no water. Food, no water.
Yep, neither.
Details added by, and here are the brothers, and then they're going to sell him into slavery.
Yep.
So it's almost like from bad to worse, right?
Although I imagine. It's an interesting thing that, then you sort of pause in this and when you get into the whole story of Judah, which maybe we'll get into next year with Tamar on the roadside. But I think that one of the really interesting things about this story too is like they didn't have to they didn't end up ultimately shedding, Joseph's blood, right? Like they didn't end up with like blood on their own hands. They benefited. They sold him into slavery. They took that money. They basically went home and then made up a story to their dad saying wild beast,
right.
Ultimately. But I do think that there was like something about like we didn't see it being done. Like they didn't have to kill him, but they thought that like terrible things would eventually happen, and they didn't actually care what happened to him. But then what ends up happening, and a little bit of a spoiler alert, we'll get into this next week, is that Joseph like sinks down and down and down, and then all of a sudden we see this like absolutely spectacular ascent.
Yeah.
And like you had said, he from his fall, perhaps, or from all of these challenges, we see Joseph really change in the most magnificent ways.
I think so. I do think so, and we will get to that as we go forward. And again, here, like the struggle that siblings have, it's and also so interesting always, like the Torah's sense of human psychology and how it can still resonate, with us so many thousands of years later, and the sense of what does it mean to feel loved? What does it mean when you don't feel loved? What does it mean when you don't feel loved and you think someone else is loved? They go all of those kinds of tensions. The other thing that's fascinating in the story is the appearance of that mysterious stranger, you know, and that stranger has to be there, or else the whole thing won't happen.
Yeah.
The whole, again, you got to get everybody down to Egypt. Well, if the stranger's not there, they'll never get there.
They don't have ways.
And that sense of
life 360.
Yeah, these people you meet and they direct your life. And so maybe you've heard me tell the story before. Maybe we can wrap it up with this because. The number of years ago, I was involved with this conversion for this young man, and in the course of the Beit Din, we said, what brought you to Jewish life? He said, well, it was Beth Am. I went to a synagogue, and I was there. I'd never been in a synagogue before, and there was a moment when the Torah was processed around. You remember this? Torah was processed around, and it was very dramatic. It really caught my attention. And he said, and someone put their hand on my back and pushed me towards the Torah, so I could touch the Torah. And I said to him, who was that? He said, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the person, that's the ish, like the person right at the right moments there in your life, push you in the right direction so you can get to the right place.
Love. Beautiful.
All right, folks. Rabbi, thank you as always.
Pleasure.
Jeremy, well done.